I'm Tim Debus with the Association of RPA, and I'm thrilled to be here, joined with Mike Newman with Returnity. I was reminded that Mike was on stage with us many years ago, and now returning with just a vast different perspective, set of experiences in his business, the reuse market. We spend our time focusing on supply chain distribution of goods with reusable packaging systems from business to business transport, where Mike and his business focuses not on e-commerce, not only in e-commerce and business to business, but also the consumer facing, especially with brands. And so it's great to be able to depart a little bit and talk about the more of the consumer perspective side, but working with brand companies in the forward reuse space and how that's being received with the consumer marketplace. Because I think also it ties in well on the supply chain as we look to have those holistic systems in place. So, Mike, welcome back to the stage, and thank you for taking time to be here. Maybe introduce yourself and Returnity would be a great start.
Great, yes, thanks, Tim. It's great to be here as always. Returnity works with brands and retailers that are under public and economic pressure to think about how they're delivering products to their customers in a more sustainable way. So our sort of keystone client is Rent the Runway. If you've ever seen those shipping bags, those are our product. But more broadly, we work with retailers on sort of whatever model they are in need of or has the opportunity to switch to reuse. So it's bags for Rent the Runway, it's grocery bags for everyone from Walmart to startups like The Rounds, it's boxes for PayPal Happy Returns and Estee Lauder for the subscription shampoo refill service. So we innovate on packaging, and then we help on the system part to make sure it's the right choice for those retailers.
And Mike, you're real close to those brands because they're interested in reusable packaging as representation of their products. Obviously, something that the consumers are looking more towards sustainability. Some of the data that we've seen, particularly from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and their performance of the circular economy, in particular with reuse, it's not very encouraging in terms of the amount of brands and retailers as part of that circular program adopting reuse systems, adopting reuse models. I think their surveys of members said that there are less than 2% of companies that were active with pilots and adoption of reusable packaging systems. On the one hand, it's a little discouraging, but I kind of look at it that the field's still wide open in terms of the opportunities for reuse with brands and retailers particularly. How are you seeing this momentum where we are, even a year later from when that research was taken, about the market interest in your product offering and the whole reuse space in general?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a disconnect right now. We've been calling it for the last few years because we saw this trend of all these companies setting these very public 2025 goals around packaging, and they said it's going to be 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable. We started calling it the Taco Bell tipping point because when Taco Bell put their name out as a retailer that was going to be all reusable, recyclable, or compostable, there's something happening in the market, right? The problem is that that hasn't necessarily followed through in as much activity as you would need since 2025 is barely over 2 years away. And this stuff is hard. I mean, I think this is an audience that understands that. So the challenge right now is I think there's that gap between where retailers have invested in piloting, learning, and growing across all three of those models, and where their public pronouncements are, where the public is expecting brands to get to, and where regulators are starting to force the issue. So definitely room for improvement.
How are your conversations starting? Because I imagine the whether it's the brands, retailers, your customers are coming to you saying, this is what we want to do. And you're understanding that, but then looking at the realities of the system of reuse, particularly with such a unique market that in many times does involve a changing customer base, consumer perception, behaviors. What is that initial dialogue in terms of what they want to do and where you think you can meet in terms of your business and maybe some of those barriers breaking through to make sure that it's successful?
Yeah, I think there's two main things that are driving retailers' perception of it. The first is it's packaging, so it's tangible. You want to sort of think about it from that angle, and so they're looking for the most innovative or interesting or maybe made out of the most sustainable material packaging. The challenge, though, is that it's more about systems and how often that package stays in circulation when you're switching to reuse than necessarily how you're making the thing up front. It's more expensive. It's going to be more energy, material intensive because it has to be durable. So part of it is coming at it from a packaging mentality first rather than a systems. And then the other is just, look, e-commerce is continuing to grow exponentially. It's their biggest, most visible part of their supply chain. It's understandable that it's where retailers tend to want to start. So usually when they approach us, they want to talk about switching to reuse for direct-to-consumer e-commerce. And it's the least circular part of their businesses usually. So their instinct is to solve the hardest problem first, which is, again, it's natural to start there, to think, well, this is what we should tackle because it's our biggest waste stream. It's our most visible part of our supply chain. The reality is it's the hardest. So finding those parts of an operation where reuse can actually sing and sustain on its own and build from there is what we try and build a bridge to for retail.
Do you find that the market is interested in reuse because they're responding to, say, mandates about being more environmentally friendly, or the customer base wants to see more sustainability? Are these brands, retailers, is the market also looking at the economic opportunity related to reusable packaging? I spoke earlier this morning, basically advising, in my experience, that look at reuse as more of that economic sustainability, having the value creation of resilience and durability in your packaging. And I do believe that relates to, as well, products that the consumers are going to handle. And is that lost or maybe not part of the conversation in terms of creating value at the onset of your conversations?
I think it's getting there, because I think a lot of the easiest things were tried first, they didn't work, and now I think retailers are kind of waking up to the reality that this is going to be a multi-year process and an investment in piloting and learning and expanding. Now, our view is subsidies don't scale. So if your program is not cost competitive, you don't have an economic model that justifies the switch to reuse, it's not really going to go anywhere. It's just going to be a press release program, and there's value in that sometimes for retailers, but the goal here is not just to do it for the press release, and it's not what the sentiment is from our partners either. I mean, they generally want to find ways to lower the impact of how they're packaging and moving their products. And so I think the conversation is coming around now, but our advice to retailers is always, you have to think about the operational cost, the efficiency. Is it economically going to be competitive? Is it going to be operationally efficient? And is it better for the planet? You kind of can't do it unless it hits on all three. And that takes some time and some piloting and some learning.
And one of the things in my conversations with Mike is that not only do you understand the business side, but you're not afraid to express it or to talk about those challenges that we need to overcome. And I know there's many cases where you've said, no, we can't do this because of this. And you place a premium on turns, on the number of uses, on that system in which a product has to be able to achieve and have the durability for a number of particular uses, however that's defined. And that's a point of emphasis for you, is making sure that that product can come back, that it's not a reusable product that's used once in the marketplace. And that's something that I think, tell me about that in terms of working with your customers on the operational side of how reuse needs to perform.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you usually see from reusable packaging manufacturers is a claim of how many times their packaging can be reused. And in a consumer context particularly, that's a meaningless statistic. I mean, who cares how many times it can be used in the lab? And the reality is that reusable packaging usually fails not because of some design or durability problem, but because you don't get it back. And if you don't get it back, you can't use it again. So you have to get it back to use it, and you have to get it back kind of a lot. We target 90 to 95%. At 80%, you're only getting 4 uses out of a reusable package on average, because you send out 80, or 100, you only get 80 back. You send out 80, you get, so every time you're losing so many because the consumers aren't returning them. In a vacuum, if you said, hey, I've got this system where 80% of my customers are going to take a pro-environmental action and return that packaging, you'd say, that's a miracle, it's amazing. But in reuse, it has to be 90, 95% in almost any context. So that's the baseline, is if you can't actually keep it in circulation, I don't care how cool the package is, I don't care how excited the customers say they are, the reality has to be actual return, actual cycles. And by the way, I mean, you're never going to make it economically competitive if you're losing 20, 30, 40% of them every cycle either. So these things line up. It's maybe not. It maybe is harder for retailers to. It's harder for all of us. I mean, when we first started talking about this, we called our reuse rate calculator. People started like, wait, what? Because instinctively you think, well, 75, 80%, that's a really high return rate. And it is, except it isn't. So being knowledgeable of that's just critical.
Well, why do you think that? Not to try and put ourselves in the minds of consumers, because if you survey them, yes, I want more sustainable products. I like the enhanced features that a reusable product can bring, but it does require that participation. And whether you're making too cool of products that they want to keep, and that's one issue in itself. Is it education? Is it really trying to get the consumer to buy in terms of the sending back, the drop off? What do you think needs to happen more culturally in the consumer mindset to participate in these programs at a higher rate, 95, 99% return?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to abandon the idea that reuse is going to somehow become how we get all our shipments and deliveries. It's just not. It's not going to be the case. And the reason why I say that is, and I don't say it with joy. I just think it's better to start from a baseline of reality. And if I told you, well, what industry am I talking about now that's been saying the way we're going to make these programs work better is education, labeling, infrastructure, incentives, penalties if you don't participate? I mean, we could be talking about reuse, or we could be talking about recycling. We have been doing that same song and dance for 40 plus years about recycling. Well, if we have more infrastructure, if it was labeled better and they knew where they could recycle it, and our recycling rates have not moved and they're terrible. So the idea that somehow magically this is all going to change for reuse is a fallacy, but that doesn't mean reuse can't be effective. It is effective. It's just effective when you are open and honest with yourselves as a provider and a retailer of what are the dynamics that have to be in place. And the reality is that there's a lot of components of your supply chain, both internal and consumer facing, that are naturally circular today. So I mentioned subscription, refill. I mean, that's a growing category. There's a reason why Estee Lauder is using reusable packaging for that and not for just one-off bottles of shampoo, because that's an engaged client. They have a repeat business with them. So if you're targeted and you're focused, you'll find those more naturally circular customers, models. That's the right place to start, not with broad brush, just put it out there.
Yeah, it's something in the consumer, we're all part of this as well in terms of convenience. We know convenience is important. We've got to make sure things are convenient, but sometimes change is inconvenient. And I think we've got to find that point in which, through that process, we can end up in a much more convenient, more enjoyable, a better experience at the consumer side. And I think your products are offering that. It's getting beyond that. But you're doing some great things in your product line. And I want you to be able to touch on maybe some examples of the products that you are bringing to market. You mentioned some of the customers, but I know your innovation as well is really taking off in terms of design and materials and handling. Maybe give us some examples of Returnity's products.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of most active in 3 customer groups. I mentioned rental, like Rent the Runway and Castle and Her Collective in the UK and others like that. And that's an exciting, new marketplace and it's the easiest application for reuse. It's always coming back from the customer. It's also where we get to stretch our legs the most on the packaging side. It's really their brand expression. It's the Rent the Runway bag is iconic for them. And so that's where we're doing a lot of the innovation on how to create form factor change and make sure it's durable and survives, the UPS or DHL or FedEx logistics system. Can it be kicked and dropped and rained on and everything else? But increasingly now we're working with companies on more internal applications where they were using cardboard before and making boxes that can just run that. It's not Gaylord bins. It's not the rigid totes that are stacked and palletized. It's stuff that's going to get shipped by UPS and handled how UPS shipments inevitably will be handled. So that's been a fun jumping off point. And then lately it's grocery. I mean, the pandemic accelerated those trends. We all know that, for home delivery and click and collect. And the retailers and consumers are just drowning in single-use bags there now. And so our ability to kind of think about the system part on top of doing the packaging innovation has been a lot of fun to tackle that. And it's only going to grow. And the regulatory environment is really, particularly in grocery, is pushing things fast. So I think that's an area that'll see a lot of change.
You started off product focused. We wanted to get the product right. And I know you're doing more on the service side, especially working with models and trying to close loops, providing those logistics services. This is a newer area for you. Maybe you can touch upon the fact that it's that whole service of not only product, but then you're really trying to help these customers get product back, repair them, maintain them, and ultimately have them circulate. How's the service side coming?
Yeah, we feel like we've had to stitch together this network to make it efficient and effective. We don't want to do things we're not good at. Like, we don't do the data side. We feel like we'd be the 10,000th best asset management company on the planet if we're lucky. So it's really about stitching together infrastructure in a way that's cost efficient and effective. Cleaning is a bigger, particularly in grocery, that's an area of obvious sensitivity. So figuring out how to onboard localized cleaning options. So now for a number of retailers, we're helping get their bags cleaned in market. You're not going to ship used grocery bags from Ohio to New Jersey and back, right? I mean, there's no economic or environmental justification for that. So we have to figure out how to do it in market. We all eat local. And so cleaning, end of life, data, tracking, all those issues, those are the little things that have to stitch together really efficiently. And we've had to get smart about who are the right partners and how do we integrate this for the retailers.
So both the Reusable Packaging Association and Returnity are members or activators of the U.S. Plastics Pact. It's an organization here in the United States with chapters based on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's implementation of the circular economy. So a lot of the statistics about we want to make commitments by 2025, 100% recyclable, compostable, reusable packaging comes from that framework. And we have a chance to work together on understanding how reusability can factor into the circular movement as well. And there's collaboration there. That's the exciting thing, is seeing multiple companies and brands and retailers really coming together to solve and connect to be able to bring reuse that's functioning effectively, that's delivering on performance, and of course the promise of reuse. And do you share with me in terms of that collaboration, really turning the page with reuse? I think when maybe a year ago when I started working, there was a lot of recycling focus, I get a sense that there is that recognition that we've got to be able to do more reuse. We can't recycle our way out of it, is a common phrase. And what's your perspective on the collaborative nature through organizations like the U.S. Plastic Pact and helping that scaling and that functionality of reuse?
Yeah, I think it's been something that's very encouraging, is just when thinking about the climate and environmental challenges we have, is how open I think industry has been to just collaborating and sharing. I don't think that retailers have approached this as a proprietary system or a distinct knowledge set that they don't want to let their competitors know about. At the end of the day, it's packaging, it's delivery packaging. I always tell retailers that we understand that cardboard is sort of dumb, cheap, and easy, which is why it's so great. So I think the instinct around delivery packaging is like, well, we have this dumb, cheap, easy thing. Let's see let's make reusables also dumb, cheap, and easy. So I think it's fostered this context for collaboration that I think it is paying off, and the visibility from the Plastic Pack and others is certainly helping too, because it's highlighting programs, work we're doing, of course, but many, many others that is succeeding, and that is going to keep encouraging retailers to go forward.
One of the things that I've recognized is on the brand side into the retail marketplace is that there's some great innovation, and there's some piloting and trialing, and say brand A says, well, we could move this forward commercially, but if our competitors do not, and they're still running the cheap, easy way of doing it, and the retailer is kind of working both systems, it can be very problematic. And that is, the scale is not just what we want to do, it's what the category should be doing. Because if the category would turn to more of the sustainable options like reusability, they'll compete on other things. There's innovation within reuse that they can compete on. But if we have the consumer who's able to say reuse, 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 I'm going to choose them and participate versus say I'm buying this and throwing it away, but I got to return this one. I see that as part of that experience and that culture shift that needs to happen. And a lot of it comes to that collaboration of multiple brands working with, say, retailers saying, we can do this together for the category and then innovate and compete with other technologies, but everything's reuse. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, and I think from our vantage point, it sort of circles back to that challenge of direct-to-consumer packaging, because the way that I think instinctively a lot of startups have tried to tackle that is making this highly immersive, controlled environment. You're going to get rewards, and it's going to ship from the retailer, and then you're going to get your product, but then you're going to return the empties to my company, and then I'm going to clean it. And it's just this very proprietary closed system that is assuming the consumers want that, and like there's all this value in that that makes that system work. When our argument would be the contrary, that you just have to you got to make it like as cheap and easy to execute as you can, because it's just shipping and delivery packaging. There's not margin in that. It's not this high value. The product side of it, sure, like when you're innovating on a new shampoo brand or something like that, like you have margin and you have capture, like there's reasons there, but for shipping and delivery, we have to remember what we're displacing and how consumers experience it today. And if you try and put up these barriers, I don't think it's a good business model to begin with, but I also think it's just slowing down the development across the board.
What's the role of technology, or the integration opportunity of technology within your business, or maybe even the sector at large? What are you interested in that you can maybe have smart, connected, reusable packaging products for your supply chain?
I think it's, from our vantage point, like little, to be honest. And the reason I say that is, so we were just out at Happy Returns at one of their facilities. They've been using our boxes for years now, and we were trying to understand how they're using data. And they're like, well, we scan them out in and out because we tie them to shipments, but we don't actually run a report of how many cycles we're getting out of your boxes anymore. I was like, what do you mean you don't? It's like, we didn't need to. They last so long. And I was sort of disappointed because I was hoping they had more attrition so I could make them more replacements, but they don't need to because it just works. And I think that's the aspiration. I mean, there's this idea, this like Silicon Valley driven idea. Well, data is power, data is not. I don't, to me and for Returnity, it's scanned when it leaves the retailer. It's scanned when it gets to a hub. It's scanned when it gets to the local delivery. Like, I don't know that knowing more in between that is necessary. So, there's some challenges in individualizing all this packaging. Obviously, you need to analyze and understand what's working, what's not. But the idea that data sort of papers over other problems in the model, I'm not that interested in that.
Could data and visibility help with some of those turn rates?
I think it helps in the margins, but our view is like it needs to be the thing it needs to be the icing, not the cake. Oftentimes, I think the idea is like data and sensors are the cake. I mean, there's reusable companies who have started putting cameras inside the packaging so you can remotely see I mean, it's interesting, I guess, but I don't understand how that overcomes the nuts and bolts of, but you have to pay so much to ship it back and there's just not that much value in that data, I don't think. So I think it is helpful. I mean, it certainly is important to understand. And a lot of the consumer-facing retailers, when we've helped them dive into that, have found like, oh, I've got some people who have held on to like 50 of these things. That's a problem. I need to understand what's going on there. So that is where it adds value. I don't think it's going to overcome a problematic business model like across the board.
Well, I was going to ask how your products fit within a smart home capability, like talk to the refrigerator or the vacuum or anything like that. But we'll hold that for something in the future.
Someone else wants to give it to. We'll put their stuff in. We're not going to develop it ourselves.
Crystal ball. This is a fast-changing industry. Even 2 years ago, it was a different mindset, perhaps a different level of a marketplace acceptance and awareness. Where do you see the next couple of years? We're definitely on the outset of maybe the pandemic. We're living to work with it. There's more of that reuse opportunity. You mentioned grocery and retail. How's this fast pace moving? Do you look 6 months, or even can you look 18 months down the line?
Well, the jumps are, it's very jumpy. The jumps are sort of, I mean, this year we'll do about 10 million shipments and deliveries in our packaging. We just are delivering enough to do 25 million additional. And a lot of that is when onboarding a new client. We're talking to a major retailer right now who, for just internal shipping, and it would be enough they would need enough to replace 100 million shipments in cardboard. And we're not going to make them, they're not going to go from 0 to 100 million shipments in our reusables, but it just shows, I think that now, and not just Returnity, but a number of other companies, now that we've found the models that are working and we're able to replicate it, I think it's going to become a meaningful percentage, I think. I don't know what that is yet, but you can see that it's becoming normalized. and it's working economically and operationally, and that's accelerating the change.
It's exciting you mentioned we found the model that works, and then you can leverage off that to grow and optimize. Are you at the point now where we can make this happen, and then if we can scale from there? I mean, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. It's just trying to standardize because, I mean, like all startups, you're trying to find product market fit. You're in the wilderness chasing shiny objects. We've transitioned out of that over the last year, and we're just trying to do the things we already know work. And we've talked to less than 1% of the market, but we've mostly been constrained by how many people we had. Because we didn't proactively go build pipeline because I didn't have a team that was big enough to service more companies. So it's a good problem to have, but it is a problem. Ultimately, it's something we've been able to solve this year. But I think that's that pivot point that's very exciting to have a model that we can just show is working it's critical for all startups.
Well, Mike and Returnity are a true disruptor of our business, packaging, sustainability, reuse space. You are light years ahead, I think, and there's a lot to learn from. And I'm so appreciative of you being able to share your perspective